Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Oh, well, good morning. It's not afternoon. Welcome to the Next Project Conversation. Again, our country's in turmoil today, but I am grateful that we have one of the most clear and conscious voices in our country with us today. We have Reverend Dr. Efrem Smith. Last week, we had a conversation at the beginning of this situation. Now that the weekend and the country has evolved and we've seen missteps by our government and we've seen the heart and passion of the people around the country really come to the streets, I want to talk about what does liberation theology look like? How do we as churches and church leaders navigate this space? And what's our message to our white brothers and sisters that have been ringing my phone asking what to do as if this is the first time a Black man's been killed? Dr. Efrem Smith, how are you doing, sir?
It's good to be back with you, my dear brother. It's a tough time, but it's good to be on this conversation with you.
So I know last time we talked, it was Saturday morning. We were both checking in with each other and you were running out to a prayer vigil in Sacramento. I know you've been doing a lot of running and talking. I saw that you made a statement for your church. Can you sort of just unpack where you are mentally and ministry wise right now with what's going on in our country?
Well, I mean, mentally and emotionally, I'm weary. I'm drained. It's a heavy time, and it's so complex because I mean, I'm from Minneapolis. I think last time I was on with you, we may have talked about that. That I actually grew up on the block where George Floyd was crying out for his mother, was saying that he couldn't breathe as the neck of a police officer, as a knee of a police officer was on his neck in the back of his head, and so that just watching that scene, knowing it's happening on the corner where you rode your bike and you hung out with your friends on the corner growing up, that's tragic and painful. And this is why the combination of that and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all of the unarmed African American lives taken even before those three, it's why we're seeing protests all around the country, even though some of those protests are being infiltrated by people that really have no agenda for solving, addressing the issues of injustice and systemic racism that African Americans face. So there's that. But then ministry-wise here locally, yes, I participated in a prayer vigil and rally with some other African American pastors on Saturday, and we actually had some of our Latina brothers and sisters and some white pastors that came and supported us and stood with us as we prayed, but as we also spoke to the moment that we find ourselves in. I've been in some meetings with African American pastors and community leaders here in Sacramento with the governor of California, and I want to applaud the governor on he listened well, and there's definitely a number of things that need to happen so true change and progress can take place. But I appreciated that he followed that private meeting up with the public press conference, where within that press conference he spoke to that at the end of the day, systemic racism is the responsibility of white people in power to solve, and that we cannot treat this as if this is a black problem.
It's not a black problem.
Brown problem. This is a problem of systemic racism, injustice, oppression that has a long history, is still very prevalent now, and in too many segments of evangelicalism specifically, the reality is being denied. And with the narrative of innocence and a narrative of as if those that are the victims, those that are carrying the weight of weariness because of this, are somehow making up systemic racism as the reason that we are in the moment we're in.
So, what was Sunday like with your congregation? I know we are in virtual spaces and stuff, but what was the flow of service? How did you guys address it, being a mostly evangelical and a majority of your other campuses being mostly white? What was the tone of the church? I know you pushed for some very specific things. So I want to hear what was the tone? Because I know in my space, being a historically African American space, I had a lot of freedom to preach what I wanted to preach and say what I wanted to say.
Yeah, well, I want to speak to the campus that I pastor, specifically Bayside Midtown Church. Though though I mentioned the issue of videos of unarmed African Americans dying at the hands of police, though I mentioned injustice, because I recorded that sermon early in the week and it
Okay.
was seen on Sunday, I I I I don't feel that that sermon that was played on Sunday for our congregation
Mm-hmm.
got as specific as it needed to be. So I actually recorded another video on
Mm-hmm.
Thursday that was released Friday and Saturday to our congregation. And my gosh, I can't believe this thing has gone so far out. I think it's got like 25,000 views or something. It's still on all my social media platforms where I speak specifically
Mm-hmm.
to George Floyd, to growing up in Minneapolis, and I speak directly to my white brothers and sisters, saying that we have to be very, very clear in this hour on what is happening and what racism is, and
Mm.
this whole notion that racism is on both sides. That that if you this whole narrative of if a black person brings up racism to white people, even bringing up the reality of racism, somehow that's being racist against white people, or to
Mm.
say terms like white supremacy or white nationalism or white privilege is somehow an offense to white people. Like I had to speak directly to that. I also did an interview with the religious news service that was picked up by Christianity Today, and
Mm-hmm.
that's out now. It was an interview. Now, interviews, when you write an article, you can put a name to it, right? You
Mm-hmm.
do an interview, you just do an interview. Well, for some reason, the religious news service decided to call my interview, the title is Efrem Smith, White Evangelicals Need to Humble Themselves.
That's a good start.
At first, I thought, oh man, that's kind of a controversial title. White
Mm-hmm.
folks might not read it. But then
Mm.
after I thought about it, I go, you know what? I'm glad that's the title. Now that I think about it, that is actually a nicer, softer title than how I'm really feeling.
At this
Because,
moment.
because at this moment, if I can just use this space as a confessional,
Mm-hmm.
I'm jealous of you, uh, Mr. Smith. I'm envious of you that you have the the history,
Mm-hmm.
credibility, the solid ground of the black church.
Mm-hmm.
Preach from, to teach from. You don't, unless you really want to, you have no obligation to nuance your sermons, your teaching, your commentary. See, I pastor a multi-ethnic church that's a campus of a predominantly white evangelical church that was named the fastest growing church in America last year by Outreach Magazine. It started 25 years ago in Placer County, one of the most conservative political counties. I think, uh, uh, well, I wrote about this in my dissertation. Uh, Placer County is the place where President Donald Trump received his strongest support in terms of votes in the state. won in 2016. So I'm not stereotyping all the people that go to the
But there's a majority in the room.
Placer County, but I'm just saying Placer County is known for supporting the president, which I don't know if we want to get into that right now, because what happened 2 days ago, that's wild.
That's a whole other craziness.
If what happened 2 days ago doesn't wake up evangelicalism, I don't know.
I was okay.
I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to see right here is the problem. See, when I said I'm jealous of you, this is an example right now. You hear how I'm pausing and I'm trying to nuance my words. Because I pastor a multi-racial, multi-ethnic church that's a campus of a large, predominantly white evangelical church. So I'm always going, how can I say this so that the broader congregation that I'm a part of can digest what I'm saying? You don't have to do that. You can get up and say, I'm not saying this primarily for white people to digest. I'm not up here behind this pulpit or on this screen trying to convince white people that systemic racism is real, that video is racialized. And so all this commentary of, well, how do you know that was racist? How do you know that the police officer had racist thought? You can't prove that. You should let the investigation take its course. You should let more information come out. Well, more information is coming out. And so all the complaints in that officer's file, the fact that his wife of color is divorcing him, and lines around why she wants a divorce. I mean, all kinds of stuff is coming out that is like the George Floyd tragedy. It's giving you a video where all the stuff we denied from the other, 26 other videos, can't deny in this one. This moment, I mean, when you have the governor of Minnesota on his knees this morning saying he's apologizing for being complicit in the system that led to George Floyd's death. That is powerful. When the governor of California says, this is not a black problem. This is, and he's talking as a governor, but as a white man, saying, this is our problem. We have to solve this. We caused this. This is a watershed moment for the body of Christ. And there's going to be a segment of the church that's going to come through this with greater credibility to proclaim the gospel, to make disciples of all nations, to present who Jesus truly is. And there's going to be another segment of the body of Christ that if they don't repent and take responsibility in this hour, they're going to lose whatever credibility they have left to present the gospel of Jesus Christ in an ever-increasing, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial, yet deeply divided nation, soaked in the wretched waters of systemic racism.
I have a question for you. And I'm going to deal with DC and the whole pimping of the Bible in another question. But I want to deal with something I think both clergy that are Black and those that are working at workplaces and have white friends. One of the things that is a national pattern is the explanation of our pain to other people. And we do it for Mike Brown and Laquan McDonald and Tamar Rice and Trayvon Martin. And how do we need to say people, this is not the first time? You should have had the plan from the last 12, 15, 20, 30 times we did this. How are you handling that? I know you're inundated, particularly because you're a national speaker, you have a lot of connections. What are you responding to this inundation to fix people's feelings or teach people the same lesson 15 times? How are you dealing with that?
I attributed it in some ways to the story in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 5, I believe it is, of the unnamed invalid, the paralyzed man that sat by the pool for
Mm-hmm.
38 years.
Mm-hmm.
And every time uh, the angelic force stirred the waters of that
Mm-hmm.
pool in Bethesda, and he hoped it was his turn to
Mm.
experience healing and wholeness. He would just get passed by with people of greater privilege and mobility that he didn't have. And and um, I thought about feeling somewhat paralyzed in this moment, emotionally,
Mm.
uh, mentally, because let me put it this way: the reason I pastor a multiracial, multi-ethnic church, I, I I was born and bred in the black church,
Mm-hmm.
and I also uh, grew up hearing the sermons of African American evangelicals like Tom Skinner and Evie Hill and Tony Evans and John Perkins, who preach these very loving, compassionate, olive branch sermons to white
Mm-hmm.
evangelical brothers and sisters about justice and racial reconciliation and
Mm-hmm.
unity in the body of Christ. That was over 30 years ago I heard those sermons.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like 30 years later, I'm preaching the same sermons.
Wow.
I'm writing the same books they wrote.
Wow.
I'm doing the same interviews they did back in the day.
Wow.
I'm asking myself, why has not much changed? So yes, oh my gosh. I mean, it's burdensome to me, but I feel like uh, now if they're younger white pastors, I kind of get it. If there's a 40-year-old white senior pastor that calls me, I kind of get that. If it's a 38-year-old white Christian that calls me, I get that. But when the pastor is 60 years old
Mm.
and they've been pastoring for years and 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 years, and they're and when I tell the stories of how I've experienced racism, and they're looking at me like they've never heard these stories in their entire life.
Mm.
Like this is the first moment they're like awake to, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I mean, I love them and I'm deeply grieved at the same time because I go, how can you not know this is true?
Mm.
Why did it take me to convince you that there is a deep racial problem in America and
Mm-hmm.
evangelicalism has been complicit in the problem?
Mm.
Like, evangelicalism began in America, inviting people to accept Christ and also nuancing theology to support the slave system.
Mm.
I mean, there's a reason the AME Zion Church that you're a part of exists because it was it was the only liberating opportunity to experience spiritual and social transformation
Mm-hmm.
for Black people. I mean, the Black denominations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there, so yeah. On one hand, I mean, this is not for everybody. I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody. I might be the one that's crazy. That I have a sense of call to justice and reconciliation,
Mm-hmm.
to liberation and bridge building. And so I'm not presenting my calling. Again, I already stated to you, I'm jealous of you. I'm envious of you, Pastor Paloma Smith. Man, man, and so for me, it's like I say yes to some of these invitations, from my white brothers and sisters. But I also have to remind them that if we don't talk through what this process is really going to look like, it's not helpful to me because what's healing to you, it increases trauma for me.
And I think that's the thing. I'm pretty sure on Sunday we have to be bold. And one of the things I said, I'm not lamenting with you and I'm not reconciling anymore because I didn't do anything wrong. And I feel the sense in this moment is the weight doesn't need to be on us anymore. The weight needs to be on them. They have the evidence, they have the video, they have good cognitive ability. They should use that to see where they are. I want to talk a little bit about the photo op, the desecration of a church, the abdication of power, the strongman tactics that President Trump used by going across Lafayette Park and then holding the Bible upside down in front of a burnt out church, and to add insult to injury. He then had his cabinet, which was about as vanilla as it could be, stand around him. No diversity, no representation. But then I am reading in some of the more, to be honest, dogmatic right-wing papers, he took a Jericho walk.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the poor theology, because people in my seat often don't understand the poor theology that's being taught in other seats to let them accept this.
Yes. Well, let me say this briefly about that. So one, it is telling that Pat Robertson of 700 Club, a long-standing, respected evangelical, was very critical of the president yesterday.
Wow.
He said that the country doesn't need a strong man. The country doesn't need law and order rhetoric. They need someone to bring them together, to calm them, to bring peace and reason. So that's telling that Pat Robertson on the 700 Club, who's a Trump supporter, was in an emotional, shaking tone, critical of the president yesterday. Second, while President Trump was standing in front of St. John's Church holding a Bible
upside down.
That's telling too.
I could preach a whole sermon on the upside down Bible.
Oh my gosh, the upside down gospel.
We be here all day.
Down theology. Black folks are the victims of upside down theology. Preaching the upside down church, upside down narratives. Upside down. Jesus is taken and turned upside down.
Talk, sir.
A brown-skinned Jewish Israeli Palestinian who was born in poverty, and we turn him upside down and we make him Italian with blue eyes and straight European hair, and we put a privileged European on the cross.
Wow.
That's the upside down gospel. So
which one of us is going to preach that first?
Both of them. We should preach it simultaneously.
We're going to preach at the same Sunday, both churches. Compare notes.
So Pat Robertson is critical of the president. Respected evangelical voice. The Bible is held upside down. Third, while President Trump is taking the picture standing in front of the church, the rector from the church, this is telling now, is on Fox News, and he's saying right now the nation and the church should be focused on systemic racism and what we're going to do about it. And then he said when the host on Fox News who was interviewing him said, aren't you glad that the president is calling for churches to open? His response was, our building may be closed, but our church has always been open. We are in our community actively doing ministry. So he made the case that his church is not closed and that the number one thing that's the rector at the church
Mm-hmm.
said, and the number one thing we should be focused on is how this country and the church is going to address racism. So I I give you those three pictures to sum up why I'm brokenhearted. Oh, and then of course there's the footage of peaceful protesters,
Peaceful.
peaceful, peaceful protesters exercising their constitution. So here's the funny thing: there were some white people 3 weeks ago with assault weapons in government buildings demanding that their freedoms to go into their church and go to whatever restaurants they want to
Get a
go
haircut.
and go and get a haircut. They had assault weapons yelling at police officers, demanding that they could go get haircuts and go to restaurants and go back to their church building. They were not met with any tear gas or rubber bullets. Matter of fact, the president said they were good people for doing this and that the governor should listen to them. But those that are protesting now are monsters and thugs, and they get rubber bullets and tear gas. This is the moment we're in, and I'm hoping that this will be a watershed moment. But I'm not holding my breath because I'm going. The other 20 plus videos of unarmed African Americans dying should have been a watershed. Trayvon Martin should have been a watershed moment.
We should have only needed one. But the one thing I will say is this, and this is a positive I'm seeing. In Oakland, you had two teenagers, I think 15, 16, organize a protest where you saw 16,000 people come out. In Menlo Park, you had 400 come out because students organized them. Under 15. In Redwood City yesterday, there was a 14-year-old and there was like 2,000 people that showed up. I'm actually right now in the next like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, heading out the door to go support a 15-year-old that will have thousands of people come out to support the marches that they're doing. Can you speak from a prophetic preacher perspective to this young generation of leaders that is out here? Because, I know there's a lot of church people that are tough guys on keyboards that talk about where's the leadership. But what's really blessing me is these 15 and 16-year-olds that are taking it on. And from a prophetic voice, somebody that's been on the front line for a long time, what's the closing message that you would give these young people? What's the encouragement you can give them?
Well, first of all, thanks again for letting me come on, because I know after I make this statement, we both got to go.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. And anytime I can be a part of this, I'm honored. I would say first, all the talk about this generation being entitled and complacent, we can throw that out the window. So I think what the church has to wrestle with, though, and this includes the African American church that I love dearly, is we have to wrestle with the fact that there's a generation of young people that have reimagined protest, social and spiritual change outside of the church, outside of pastoral leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have to take some responsibility for that. We can't just point at them and say, what's wrong with y'all? There's a reason that Black Lives Matter, when they first started, they were having their chapter meetings on Sunday at 11 a.m. It was a message to the church that they didn't feel that there was space and room for them to voice who they are. And again, I know some of my African American pastors are going to be offended by what I just said. And I'm saying, please.
No, but that's evidence, though. There's evidence for this.
These are our babies. These are our grandkids. These are our nephews and nieces. These are our sons and daughters. And praise God, there are some pastors out there on the front line protesting. There are pastors out in the community. But in so many ways, there are too many young people trying to figure out a response without the guidance, the formation, the empowerment, the tutelage and comfort of the church. So I'll end it there. Thanks so much for
Thank you
letting
so
me
much.
know. I love you, man, and talk to you again
Too,
soon.
sir. We will definitely talk. Um, Everybody, thank you so much. Over the next few days, we're going to have some time shifts. There's a lot going on in the world, and a lot of the individuals that we are working with and meeting with are those that are on the front line. So tomorrow, we're going to have the only Black female mayor in Silicon Valley, Regina Wallace Jones, at at 11 a.m. She's going to talk about what is it like to lead the only like minority community in this enclave of wealth during COVID, during this moment in history. She's going to do an amazing job. Next Monday, we're bringing a very special presentation. My good friend Ben McBride, who is one of the most influential, one of the most serious, one of the most focused frontline social justice warriors of our generation. He's been marching from Ferguson, and every time there's an issue, he's systematically been working on it. He's going to not only talk about his experience in leading a movement over the last 5 years, but he's also going to talk about how those of us who aren't in places that have front lines, how can we get engaged? How can we be as important parts of the movement? So we will have we'll have Ben McBride next week. And let me let you know, I want to encourage everybody, please go out, protest, encourage, pray, fund, do something, because right now is a moment in time where we can't just sit and type. Posting is not a solution. Posting is just reporting. We need you to get to the streets. We need you to start funding. We need you to start supporting churches. We need you to just do something. Be bold in this season. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Next Project Conversations.